Coming to you from Brick House in downtown Brooklyn, this is 112BK. On the show today, a breakout social media star in New York's Hasidic community. And speaking of Jewish women who are role models, we're going to hear from the producers of a new documentary about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Hi, I'm Ashley Ford. Thanks for joining us today. An assistant professor of sociology at Ohio State University, Natasha Quadlin, conducted an audit study exposing a truth that some people seem to be shocked by, but probably not most women. Quadlin submitted 2,106 applications for jobs described as appropriate for new graduates, college grads that is. Now, the only information she changed on the applications were the applicants' grades, gender, and undergraduate major. Per her findings, men's grade point average didn't seem to matter to employers much at all. But while women applying for the same jobs benefited from moderate academic achievement, they were actually penalized by having high levels of achievement. Yes, you heard that right. Women with high GPAs were less likely to be called back regarding employment in their fields of study. This is one of those times when my heart might move faster than my brain, so let me state this as calmly and as clearly as I can. To be a woman in this country is to be constantly judged by how you make people feel instead of what you can do for people. What does that mean? It means that women in the workplace, brilliant women, are more likely to be judged by their employers based on their general likability than by their accomplishments or contributions to the company they work for. Not only that, but the idea that women of high achievement are inherently unlikable and therefore lack value is fueled by the same misogynistic thinking that leads to women and girls having to fight for access to education and working opportunities around the world. This is how it works in far too many workplaces. Men get respected, women, hopefully, get liked. And we all suffer. How a country treats its women is a great predictor for how successful that country can be. So to the men who are too intimidated by strong women to compete with us in the workplace, know this: you can't do it without us, even if you wish you could. Next up, we're going to talk with Adina Miles, a.k.a. Flatbush Girl, about the power of women in the Jewish Orthodox community. And later, a new film about another Brooklyn woman who's broken a few barriers, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. That's all coming up. All media bring into sharp relief the divisions between tradition and modernity. But social media is a special animal in this way. Plastering your face and your thoughts all over the internet, there's just no precedent. So let's face it, it makes the more traditional among us a bit uncomfortable. Nowhere is this more true than in the traditionally cloistered Orthodox Jewish communities of Brooklyn, especially when it's a woman doing the plastering. Our next guest is trying to break down some of these barriers. Under the moniker Flatbush Girl, she's a social media sensation among Orthodox Jews. And she also runs a successful consulting firm, Flatbush Media. Right now, we're excited to have her here in the studio in person. Welcome, Adina Miles, to 112BK.
Hey, what's up? How are you?
I'm fantastic, Adina. You come in here so bright and shiny and light up my whole studio, and I'm really happy about that.
I'm so glad I can do that for you.
Now, I live in Flatbush. Tell me a little bit about how Flatbush Girl got started.
So kind of started where I wanted to create my own marketing company. I felt that I had what it took with my background as having a master's in literature, creative writing. I felt that I had what it took to be creative and help tell stories, storytell, and I wanted to utilize that professionally and help brands tell their story on social media. And when I begun, there was a lot of resistance to someone who is a no-name person, has no previous clients, and so I was like trying to make my name, and it was proving very difficult.
Right.
And then I was like, 1 second, maybe I have to do this a little backwards. Maybe I have to first get my name out there by entertaining the audience, kind of drawing them in with humor and laughter and some subtle messages sprinkled in between the jokes.
Right.
And then once I have that platform for my name, kind of showing that as my magnum opus to my potential clients, and then drawing them in that way.
So you like became the example of what you can do.
Exactly.
Essentially.
Yes.
I like that.
Thank
I like
you.
that. So for those who aren't following you, who are obviously missing out, what can they expect to find on your social feed, on your Instagram, in your stories? Like, what is Flatbush Girl out in the city doing?
Okay, so I know this sounds a little funny, but the way I create and communicate with my audience is in a very haphazard, spontaneous way. Yeah. It's not like we sit there and storyboard and reverse engineer what we're going to be putting out for the audience, right, and that I know exactly what I'm going to be doing. But I guess like the spectrum of it, the broad spectrum of it, would be me trying to create social commentary that can resonate through humor. Because humor is a soft way to sprinkle in these nonconformist messages and really empower young girls. That is my main target. The girls who are still in elementary school, who are being told amazing messages about, you know, their sense of independence and their abilities and their strengths, but the teachers are not going all in.
Right.
There's always like that fake ceiling, and I'm trying to break the ceiling so that they know, like, your teachers are saying your ceiling is here, your ceiling is much higher than that.
Yes, absolutely. I like that. And it sounds to me like if people come to your social feed, there is something that they can expect, and that's a level of authenticity and a level of encouragement and maybe even empowerment a little bit.
I think so. I think that they'll also see someone who's really not afraid of hate. I get a lot of hate. I get a lot of DMs, private messages from anonymous names, sometimes not anonymous. I get emails. I've even gotten phone calls. People trying to scare me into, you know, stopping to speak my truth.
Are these people within the Hasidic community?
I wouldn't say necessarily one type of community, but basically under the umbrella of religious Jews. And they feel like they're protecting their clan by making me be quiet. Right. And really my goal is not as extreme as they believe it is. My goal is not to shatter the system. My goal is not to have people like, you know, just say like, laissez-faire, we're not doing any of this. I think that there is a very important role in tradition, in the family unit, in you know, in the culture, in our tribe. I think those things are beautiful. It's just where it limits girls from really reaching their potential and understanding their power as females rather than their weaknesses as females.
Do you find that some of what comes back at you is from the very people who you're like, you have to understand, we were girls. We know how hard it was to be girls growing up and wanting to, you know, work in certain industries and believe in ourselves certain ways. It's like, how come you can't really make the connection between what I'm trying to do here and your experience?
I definitely hear you. I think there's a certain, I want to say bitterness that comes from the women who see me doing what I do and thinking to themselves like, but I couldn't do that, so how come you're allowed to? And yeah, I would say most of the backlash is from females, and even if it's not coming from a place of bitterness, it does come from a place where they are trying to protect the tribe.
But there has to be some place we can meet in the middle, and I think you're actually creating that space through your channel. One of the things that was really striking to me about the Going In video with Brian Vines that you did was your image being altered in that local newspaper. But can you tell us about that experience? To be perfectly honest, I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't know that having the photo blurred out in the newspaper would even be a thing that would happen.
I know, it seems so archaic.
It does.
Like, especially within our modern world where, like, this isn't even a question of equality. It's almost being, like, degraded to a level of being inhuman. Basically, what happens is that when you have the very religious magazines, they want to limit certain kinds of feminine photos that seem sexually expressive. But in order to do that, where it not being a gray area, the easiest way to do that would just be to say, no females.
Right.
My photo was in the newspaper, but it was covered by a smiley face.
Right.
So my beginning battle is not even like full-blown photos. Like, let's just start with neck-up photos.
Right.
Let's not erase faces.
I want to switch a little bit from Flatbush Girl into Flatbush Media. Give me a description about what you do at Flatbush Media.
So I kind of help bring brands that are not familiar with social media into the digital age. I have the sensitivities in place to understand from their perspective, like the kind of ways they want to, you know, portray themselves on social media, because it is a tricky place for a Jewish brand to be.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so I have that sensitivity, but at the same time, I have the ability to know how to marry the two.
Do you find that Flatbush Girl in any way has gotten in the way of Flatbush Media? Because Flatbush Girl was used to build Flatbush Media, you know, and so people could understand exactly what you could do, which is phenomenal. Do some people go the other way because of Flatbush Girl?
Definitely. I've had a lot of brands who say, listen, we see what you can do. We know you have the mind of someone we want to work with, but we don't want you. We don't want that you. In the beginning, initially, this was hard for me. It was hard for me not to get defensive and protective over myself and feel personally insulted.
Right.
But as the months have progressed, and it's really a consulting firm in its infancy. It's really almost only a year old.
Right.
You know, and we've gone from 2 clients to 12 clients, which was really great. But, you know, over those months, I've been able to build the muscle where I understand they're just operating out of fear, and that kind of engenders sympathy from me rather than feeling defensive.
What happens when companies leave?
You know, it's hard to hear from a company words like, and I did a post about this recently where this month I had 2 clients leave me who told me that they love my work. They love the work ethic, they love the communication, they love the customer service, and they're happy with the metrics. But they are afraid of what people will say about them if they continue to work with me. Now, let's say they'll have one anonymous phone call from someone saying, hey, I'm not going to shop in your store anymore if you keep using Flatbush Girl. And they go, oh, no, we can't have this. And they preemptively prepare themselves for some sort of backlash, which I personally think would never happen.
Yeah, I can't imagine. Like, what would the backlash be about? I got to tell you, listen, now I've just recently become familiar with Flatbush Girl. But if somebody come down my street with some sort of anti-Flatbush Girl poster, I would probably be like, you need bigger problems. You need much bigger problems.
But in addition to having the same perspective as you, you have way bigger problems to worry about.
Come on.
I also would venture to say that if they had the muscle for it, they don't realize that that kind of controversy, that fake controversy, would be amazing for their brand.
I wasn't going to say it, but here we are. Moving forward, what are your big dreams, big goals for Flatbush Girl and for Flatbush Media?
I really don't have a long-term goal other than just something having to do with empowering young girls and somehow growing my business. But other than that, the nuances, the between the lines, all those things, I really just allow it to change and evolve naturally day to day. For me, it's like art. For me, it really is like, you know, waking up and seeing what's on the canvas and saying like, oh, like now I see it needs that brushstroke, and being willing to be so nimble.
Because things come into your life because you're open to them sometimes. And you don't miss them. You see them because you're open to them. When you close yourself off, you don't know when they're coming. But when you're open, anything can come. Anything can happen. And you sort of build your dream on the way up. And
you know, something that's interesting, though, about Flatbush Girl is that, like, and I think I don't know, like, I'm reading you a little bit, and I feel like maybe you're waiting for like the jokes or the humor or something.
No.
No, but I'm actually not that much of a funny person. It's really, it's like funny because I use humor only because I recognize how strong it is in letting people's defense mechanisms come down.
It's a tool.
It's definitely.
It's a tool.
Like, I'm really not funny.
Yeah. So you are even if you don't think of yourself as funny, which I actually think of you as funny,
okay,
but that's fine. But if you don't think of yourself as funny, what you are is an effective communicator and a really good messenger. And you have good timing. And good timing is requisite for good humor. So when you land, girl. It's been fantastic having the opportunity to talk with you today.
Thank you so much.
I cannot wait to see what continues to happen in your life, because I've got a good feeling.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
My pleasure. So here's the thing. You are probably not going to be able to see this whole thing if you're watching it on TV. You'll have to tune into the podcast to hear the rest of my conversation with Adina Miles, a.k.a. Flatbush Girl. And don't forget, you can see Adina in action both as Flatbush Girl and running her business in our latest episode of Going In with Brian Vines on our YouTube channel, BRIC TV. So far, today's show has been focused on women and the barriers society erects in the way of their success, no matter how smart, educated, or qualified they are. The subject of our next segment is no different. It's about a woman who wanted to enter a male-dominated field and encountered resistance, but persevered, only to become one of the most recognizable, most influential, most notorious women in Washington. And she got her start right here in Brooklyn. Of course I'm talking about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And recently, producer Ross Tuttle sat down with Julie Cohen and Betsy West, the creators of the new documentary about RBG's life, which will be premiering in theaters around the city this week. Here's that conversation.
So Julie and Betsy, thank you for joining us today. We're happy to have you here. Julie, when I met you at the Sundance pre-party, I was excited to hear more about this film and this incredible woman. I want to know first, you know, it seems like an amazing score to be able to do a film about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. How did it happen?
Well, both Julie and I had interviewed Justice Ginsburg for separate projects. Mine in 2011 about the modern women's movement. Julie several years later for her documentary, The Sturgeon Queens. And so we had talked about Justice Ginsburg over the years and really had begun to notice her growing fame as the notorious RBG in the wake of some very powerful dissents that she had issued from the bench. So in 2015, one day we were talking and saying, this is an incredible story, but many of her fans don't know the full story. They don't know her history. They don't know her amazing love story, and someone should do a documentary. It should be us.
And was this before seeing her face spray painted on the sidewalk and those stencils with the crown and all?
You know, I think it was actually just around the time that all that was happening. Like, we understood that there was a population of young women in particular who were really obsessed with RBG and sort of her persona, but at the same time that didn't really know the full story and everything that she had done early in her career in the 1970s as a lawyer to secure equal rights for the genders under the U.S. Constitution. An amazing accomplishment, an amazing body of law that she really was at the forefront of creating. And so I guess we sort of took the crown stuff as a teachable moment, as people say, to kind of like, let's take this opportunity to look at the full story, to tell her whole life then and now, professional and personal.
And I like that in the film that you do present that and how she wasn't welcome in this clique of lawyers, right? And it was her, I guess her husband encouraged her, you know, and backed her to be, you know, who she could be, and you know, really powerful and really ahead of her time.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg graduated at the top of her class at Columbia Law School, but she came out and could not get a job. She eventually became a professor. At the same time, the women's movement was growing, and some of her students asked her to look into the area of women's law, and she quickly discovered that women had second-class citizenship in this country. I mean, if you were a woman, you couldn't get credit without your husband signing on. You could be fired if you became pregnant, and men were never prosecuted for raping their wives. And so she began a project to systematically bring a series of cases that would challenge this kind of discrimination. By the time she got done with it, she really had changed the law for American women.
Wow. And so she was, you know, help me place her in the pantheon, I guess, of Supreme Court justices. Sandra Day O'Connor was the first woman.
RBG was number two.
Number two.
Yeah.
So she followed in those footsteps, but she's really kind of carved her own path in the court.
Absolutely. I mean, she would tell you that Sandra Day O'Connor really was quite welcoming to her in her early days. I think it wasn't an easy row to hoe for Justice O'Connor, being one woman among 9. Maybe a small but symbolic example was that when RBG became a justice, O'Connor showed her her trend that she had started of wearing a jabot, a fancy collar, trying to move away from the sort of austere maleness of the black robe, which is really such a man's outfit designed for a man. O'Connor had started putting on some nice fancy collars. Ruth Bader Ginsburg took up that and ran with it. It could seem like a silly example, but the point was it's symbolic. Like this is a woman's place now too. This is not just a home for men.
Right. Sorry, you're going to say
I was just going to say that even though Sandra Day O'Connor was appointed by a Republican, Justice Ginsburg appointed by a Democrat, and they had some common ground. When Justice Ginsburg first started on the court, she really was considered to be a moderate. And sometimes very often she would be in a majority with Justice O'Connor. As the court has moved to the left, as the court has moved to the right, Justice Ginsburg has not changed her positions, but she's further to the left.
She's the one unshifting, and the court's moving.
The court's moving around her
to the right.
Interesting, and she's had to be this voice. So that's, I mean, tell me about. I want to talk about the film and your experience spending time with her. But just tell me real quickly about sort of Julie, maybe about the imprint that she's made on the Supreme Court.
Absolutely. Well, you know, there's so many areas you could go. We tended to focus largely on her women's rights cases, and you know, after what she did in the 70s, once she became a Supreme Court justice, probably her most lasting legacy in terms of a majority opinion that she wrote was the Virginia Military Institute case, where she wrote the opinion that opened up this all-male, federally funded military institute to both genders. Like, women can go there now because of her, and that decision laid out the general rule, which had never been, the court had never taken before, that a law that discriminates on the basis of gender should be presumed unconstitutional. That was what she was fighting for in the 70s. She finally, like, hit the nail in her 1996 decision. More recently, she's become more well-known for the dissents that she writes, speaking out against often a conservative court majority ruling on certain things, and she writes a dissent that says,
Right. Yeah. I mean, when we look back in history, I think, and we read those, we'll really see the sort of a kind of conscience of the left and progressive voice, which will be preserved and hopefully preserved in a greater sense. To talk about the film, maybe a small spoiler alert, but you guys kind of gave up the goods early on to seeing her working out in the gym. What was it like to film that and see this robust 84-year-old woman, you know, with the weights?
Well, you know, we were a little hesitant to ask her to let us film in the gym, so we waited for a while, and then finally we popped the question, and she said yes. I think that would be possible. So a few months later, there we are, and she walked into that gym, ignored us, ignored the 2 cameras, and just started what was a very impressive workout, just following the orders of her trainer, Brian Johnson. And we were amazed, and also, I think, instantly realized why she said yes. Here she is.
Badass.
Yeah, and why not own it? You know, she's 85 years old, and she's keeping herself in shape to do the job that she loves, and now she's an icon not just for younger women, but for older women as well.
Right, right. That's great. And what was her buy-in, Julie, with the film? I mean, how involved was she, and how much did she really kind of participate? Yeah,
Justice Ginsburg's participation in the film was kind of a slow, steady process. We first actually approached her in January of 2015, so quite a long time ago, with the idea of making a film about her life. Her answer at that time was essentially not yet. we decided to kind of move forward. A few months later, we let her know that we were intending to interview, even if we didn't need to do a sit-down interview with her, we were thinking that we would be interviewing her clients from her cases in the 70s, former colleagues over the years, some other people, and she sort of gradually got on board with the idea that we were going to be filming about her life. At one point, she gave us a list of public events that she was going to be going to, some of which didn't have cameras in them other than ours, over the next year or so that she thought might make good filming opportunities.
And you're like, yes,
and so it was almost just like
step by step,
and just kind of by being there over time, that
we
eventually
we would hi,
Justice, here we are, and all over the country too. Like here we are in Chicago, here we are in Virginia, like wherever you go, like
well, what a great project to be able to follow over a course of time.
It was great.
And what does she make of the film?
Well, she did not ask to see the film ahead of time, and so she came to Sundance for its premiere, and she sat in an audience of over 500 people. Julie and I sat across the aisle from her, which was, quite a nerve-wracking hour and a half as we watched her every reaction. But it became pretty clear pretty soon that she was really responding very well to the film, and she laughed, and at certain points she cried. Even a few places we were surprised at. She dabs her eyes when, in the early opera scene, there's a scene where she is talking about the meaning of music and opera to her, and we're listening to a very beautiful love duet, and she dabbed her eyes. And at the end, we came down to do a Q&A, and the first question to ostensibly to us was, what does Justice Ginsburg think of the film? And she just popped right up out of her seat and came down to the front, and we were happy. She said that she really appreciated the film, that it exceeded her expectations, and we were relieved.
That's great. I need to point out, and she mentions this in the film and in her confirmation hearings, she says, I'm Brooklyn born and bred.
Yes. Yes, and boy, is she proud of Brooklyn. Yeah. So, yes, for the Brooklyn home team, she went to Madison High School and is still a Brooklyn partisan. Her daughter still lives in Manhattan and is a professor at Columbia, so actually Justice Ginsburg is back in the New York area fairly frequently, and will say that she was born and raised in Brooklyn at any opportunity. She likes to make the comparison that she and the notorious BIG have that fact in common, that they're both Brooklynites.
So she embraces that.
She really embraces Brooklyn. Yes.
And embraces being the notorious.
She does.
Yeah,
she thinks it's funny.
Yeah.
And great.
Yeah.
Wow, that's great. So we'll hopefully get all the Brooklynites to come out to see the film. How can they see it? When can they see it? Yes,
well, starting on May 4th, the film is opening in 10 cities, and those 10 cities do include New York and Brooklyn specifically. How specific do I get?
Well, tell us what theaters.
Both BAM, Rose Cinemas, and Alamo Drafthouse are going to be opening on May 4th. I think there's even some preview screenings at Alamo on May 3rd. So.
And eventually, it's going to be on CNN.
Eventually, in the fall, it will be on CNN, but it'll have a theatrical run.
All right. Well, great. Well, thank you both so much for coming out and sharing this lovely project with us and the rest of Brooklyn and the world. And we'll look forward to seeing it in theaters.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Very nice.
Thanks for joining us today. We'll be back next week with conversations about gentrification, food justice, child welfare, and Black political power. I hope you can join us. Have a great weekend.